remember putting on roller skates and Lamanite Generation grass skirts and skating around at midnight at the
familiar. Sounds familiar.
What else are you going to do in Provo at midnight? Right? And we'd play music. We'd play like, what did we play? Like ABBA but we were straight. And Erasure. ABBA and Erasure.
In the theater program. Costume designer.
Skating in Lamanite Generation women's costumes.
In women's Lamanite Generation. In circles listening to ABBA. Yeah. Sounds like paradise.
It was heaven. A little bit of heaven.
And now you are a costume designer still.
I am.
What you studied to go to school for, you actually do.
I actually did. And then I went to grad school and got serious about it. And then was very lucky to go to New York, have a job waiting in New York when I graduated grad school, assisting Paul Tazewell on Broadway stuff. And then we were doing the show in Amsterdam where it was like a hip-hop Alice in Wonderland. It's hard to explain. It was commissioned from someplace in Amsterdam. But I used to take work home with me. And there was one night where the Cheshire Cat was like a pimp in this thing.
Right.
And he had a big overcoat they would
familiar.
open.
Did I see that?
When I had to paint all the dildos. And they were like, it's like...
With glow paint?
So we went out and bought like dildos and blow-up dolls and big latex fists and all these things. And I had to paint them all neon so they would glow in the dark at this moment in the show. So I'm sitting in our apartment with like surrounded by day-glow dildos and fists and big like mouths, you know, big blow. I had to cut the faces off the blow-up dolls so we could sew them inside. Yeah. I was working in the Juilliard costume shop one day, and Ivana Trump's maid brought in a bunch of her giveaway clothes she didn't want anymore, and one of the things was this gold lame jumper.
Do you still have it?
I still have it. And so we used to, that was our induction to our apartment. Everyone who came to visit us had to put on the Ivana Trump gold lame jumper, and we took a Polaroid, and I still have the Polaroid
It's fabulous.
Of course, now, when you wore it, you were the only one who did it in blackface.
Yes.
You know, being at BYU was, it was, you know, incredibly difficult at times. It was torture, you know. It was, it's the biggest thing I've ever had to do in my life is reconcile being gay and growing up trying to be the perfect Mormon kid. I mean, there's no reconciliation. This started before BYU for me because I was on my mission right before BYU. And I remember talking to my mission president saying, you know, I've done gay stuff and I've like messed around with boys. And he's all, okay, whatever, you know, pray and fast and you're forgiven, whatever, right? Which I think is one of the biggest disasters of the Mormon church. That the people in leadership positions who maybe a lawyer, maybe an insurance salesman, maybe a gardener, are somehow qualified to give advice, life-changing advice to young people who are on the verge, you know, sometimes of ending their lives. I certainly was there a couple times. But, you know, I went to BYU, I tried to be good. There were times where, you know, the guilt was so overpowering and it was so dark for me that, you know, it was blinding. You couldn't focus on anything. So I did what every good Mormon kid is supposed to do. You go to your bishop, who refers you to stake president, who refers you to their friend, the counselor. And I did the whole reparative therapy thing. I did.
You did?
Oh, I blew my entire life savings on reparative therapy and therapies.
At BYU?
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was all like free.
No, I paid like professionals.
But
yeah.
they worked for BYU, or they sent you somewhere else?
No, I went to private people, to like outside of BYU.
And they still did it?
Oh, yeah.
Were they Mormons?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, you know, one of my worst experiences of my life is sitting in this therapist's office trying to fix myself every week. This guy was a stake president, and I'll say his name, I don't care. Siemens was his name. And
ironic.
Yeah, exactly. And he would sit and literally, I could count about 5 minutes into each session where he'd fall asleep in his chair, in his big leather armchair, and he'd do this with this big, like, shit-eating grin on his face. and just kind of nod his head and fall asleep while I'm pouring my heart out, trying to save my life. And it may seem that I'm bitter, because I am. You know, I was doing what I thought was best. But the least the guy could do was stay awake. For years I did that. You're just not praying hard enough. You're just not fasting enough. You're just not dating enough girls. Because that's the Mormon formula for turning straight. Right? You're not praying enough, you're not fasting enough, you're not dating enough girls. At least back in the day when we were there. That's what anyone told you. You know?
Why is it called reparative therapy?
You know, it depends on kind of who you ask.
I mean, did you do any of those
none of the shock
with the
stuff
tack or with the rubber band or physical pain?
They recommended I do that stuff, and I never did any of that stuff.
Then you didn't do everything.
But no, I did do the rubber. I did do the rubber band a lot because of course, if you masturbate, you're a horrible, evil creature in the eyes of the Mormon Church. And so and remember that was it like Boyd K. Packer or something who gave the advice of when you feel like you want to masturbate, you imagine yourself in a tub full of worms, which is like in a priesthood manual. It's like in a real thing. And so I'm like, the tub of worms thing is not going to stop me from masturbating. So, and there weren't enough rubber bands at the Office Max to stop me from doing that. So, it didn't work, obviously. So, and obviously, and they were always saying, well, this is why you're having these gay feelings, these homosexual feelings, because you masturbate. I'm like, if that were the case, every man on earth would be gay.
Right.
But, I was convinced I was doing the right thing, like most of us did. And I had a eureka moment. I remember the moment I said to myself, I'm gay. And it was, I was working out of town in Tennessee, of all places, doing like a summer gig for a few weeks, sort of thing. And I was driving in a car. And it's funny because when I went to that place, it was the first time I went somewhere to work where I didn't identify myself as Mormon. And people everyone there that I worked with assumed I was gay.
Right.
As they should have. And it was the first time I remember driving in a car one day, and I said to myself out loud for the first time, I'm gay. And it was just like, like heaven opening up, and it was like a Monty Python, like clouds and big hand of God and trumpets and moment. And then it wasn't long after that Matthew Shepard died. And the whole thing went on in the media. And that sealed the deal for me. And sometime around that time, too, was when Stuart Mattis killed himself on the steps of the church. And Stuart, I never knew Stuart, but his sister was my sister's roommate at the time. And so that affected me really deeply. And I remember I couldn't wait to get home and tell my parents I was gay, because it was just such a burden lifted from me. And I remember I raced home, and this was driving to the coast of North Carolina. So I drove home, and this was shortly after the Matthew Shepard thing. And my dad wasn't home, but my mom was home, so I sat her down. I didn't even go upstairs. I went right in the house. My mom met me, and I sat her right down and told her. And she was very cool. She was kind of like, okay. And I sort of got the sense, I've been waiting for this. And then she, kind of exited quickly upstairs, where sure she went and cried for a while. But then my dad came home soon after, my dad who's been bishop and da-da-da-da. And I said, Dad, I'm gay. And he was like, well, I've worked with people like this, and just, don't be so sure you can't pray and fix this. I'm like, no, believe me, that's not going to work at this point. And it took a while, but my parents are, very cool with it now.